Hi everyone, we're going to be working on a soda can still drawing. Now, it doesn't actually have to be a soda can. It could be any sort of drink that comes in a can. But what we're going to be doing for this still life is we're actually going to be doing 3 individual drawings that go together. So the first drawing is going to show a complete solid can, and then it's slowly going to get crushed as it goes along in the series. It's also going to have less detail and less color as the progression goes. Now, when you have a series of drawings that come in a set of 3, this is called a triptych. And this is something that was really popular during the Middle Ages, but they have made a resurgence in recent years by a lot of contemporary and modern artists. And it can be any image that you want that sort of tells a story from beginning, middle, and end in any way that you want to do that. So let's get started on our triptych. So in order to do this, you're going to need a white piece of drawing paper, a pencil, and of course a soda can or any other kind of object in a can. You could do this with a plastic bottle as well, but we are planning on crushing this later in our drawing series, so I'm using a can because it's going to do a better job crushing. Now, it doesn't matter what can you pick, but make sure you're picking one that has an interesting design to it and also something that you think matches your skill level. So if you pick something that's extremely complicated and you feel like your skill level is low enough that that will be really hard to achieve, I recommend picking something simpler, maybe like a Pepsi can, something with just a really basic logo. Something like this has a lot more activity going on, so it's really going to depend on what works best for you. So no matter what can you're drawing, you're going to want to set it on the table, so not lay it on its side like I have it right now. But if I set it on the table right now, you're not going to really be able to see anything except for the top of the can. So I am going to leave it on its side just so you can see what it might look like. I might even tilt it to show you what it would look like if you were looking at it sitting on a table. Nearly every can is the exact same basic shape, so we're going to start with that. So we have the 2 straight sides on either side, so I'm going to start by drawing that. Don't worry about them being totally perfect. You can always get a ruler to straighten things up. The next thing you're going to notice is that on most every can, it kind of goes in a little bit. It has a bit of an angle where it goes inwards. So I'm going to draw that as well. And then the next thing you'll notice is the top of it, the round lid. Now, if I look at it straight up and down, it literally is round. But when it's sitting on a table and you're looking at it from an angle, it looks more like a squished oval. So that's how we're going to represent it on our paper. So I'm going to take my pencil and I'm going to draw sort of a squished oval shape. This is also called an ellipse. And I'm filling in the space where the lines ended with this lovely curved ellipse shape. Now you'll notice, because I'm repeating it over and over and over again, I'm ending up making sort of a thicker edge, almost by mistake, but it is something you want. You do see a sort of a thicker edge here, and then you can kind of see a curve on the interior part right here that kind of looks like it's disappearing. So I'm going to try to imitate that in my drawing here. And the other thing you're going to notice is that there is usually a pull tab, not always, sometimes they fall off or they get torn off, but there is sort of an oval squished dark space, and then there's this oblong oval shape tab that's pulling out of it. When you're trying to draw things in proportion or in their accurate size and placement, you have to talk to yourself a lot and ask yourself a lot of questions about where things are located. So the first question to ask yourself is, where is this tab? Is it right in the center of the can? Is it off to the side? How high up does this tab go? Is it going past the edge of the can, or is it still inside the space of the can? So as you are drawing and asking yourself those questions, you have to make sure that you are trying to represent them accurately on your page. So don't worry too much about the details, about if you're shading everything correctly or anything like that. Right now we're just concerned about the contour lines. That's the outline shape of things and the very fine outline interior details as well. We'll worry about shading when we get to coloring. So I've reached the end of the top of my can, and now I'm ready to work my way to the bottom of the can. the bottom of every can is going to be a curve shape. So it's not straight across. There's no straight line across. It's actually a bit of a curve shape. And you'll also notice that almost always there's a little bit of another angled aspect. So again, kind of like a little like lip at the bottom. So I'm going to angle the end of my can just a little bit inward. And then when I create the bottom, I'm going to do a curve shape. So when I draw the bottom, I want to make sure it's a curved shape and it is not straight across. It shouldn't be round, completely round, but it should have a bit of a slight curve to it. And that's the basics of the shape of a can. Pretty much any can that you're going to draw is going to be very similar setup to this. All right, now's the part where you're going to start blocking in the shapes and the other elements of your can. No matter what it is you're doing, you want to block in where everything's going to go. This should all be done really lightly so that you can erase any mistakes. I'm going to start looking at the most important elements. So I have some lettering here. It's pretty much right on the top part. So right where this bend is, that's the space that it's in. So I don't want to go below that. So I might even very lightly draw kind of like a guideline for myself so I know, okay, I shouldn't go below that when I write my letters. And then I'm going to look at the other end and figure out how high up these letters go. So there is some space here, and then you have the letters straight across and then a little bit more space before we have our lemon. When you're doing this part, don't worry if the fonts are perfect or not. We're just working on spacing to make sure everything is spaced out correctly. So I am just blocking in my letters, seeing if I'm making them too big, too small, or if they're just the right size. And I'm going to block in my nice giant lemon shape now. Ask yourself all those questions like I was talking. Where is the bottom nub of this lemon? Where does it start? It starts just a little bit past the S. So when I'm drawing it over here, I'm going to make sure that I start it somewhere over there as well. There are some raspberry shapes. The first one is right above the word aid. The other one, kind of from my point of view, goes off the edge of the can. I really can't see it very well. It's kind of disappearing. So I'm going to make sure that when I add that, I'm going to have it go off the edge of the can. And I'm going to look at things like where the leaf is. So the leaf is right below the Y of raspberry. So I think I'm going to make sure I write these letters in so I have some sort of reference. And it doesn't go above this curve, but it ends right around the A in lemonade. And now I have a great shape for my lemon, and I think the sizing is really good also. I think everything's in the place that it should be for the most part. Now I didn't spend time making sure I did all the curves of my raspberry right, or that I did all of the shapes correct. I'm not worried about that right now. Again, right now I'm just blocking in things. Next, I'm noticing there's some stripes on either side of the lemon. So I'm trying to look at where does the first stripe end up? How many stripes are there? Where does the last stripe end up? So ask yourself all those questions as you are drawing. When you're drawing, you should always be asking yourself a lot of questions about what you're seeing. All right, now the last thing I'm going to be blocking in are the words on the lemon. So I have this big phrase polar. Underneath it I have some letterings, and then above it as well. Now look at the shape of the word polar. Where does the first letter start? Where's the last letter end? How far away from it, the edge of the lemon, is it? Is it perfectly horizontal, or is it tilted a little bit? Are the letters on one end bigger than the letters on the other end? You could even use your finger or a pencil or something to measure and say, okay, that's how long the R is. Let me move it over here. Well, the P is definitely a lot longer. So I want to make sure that my first letters are bigger than my last letters. One thing to do to help you stay inside the space is, again, give yourself some guidelines. Just like how I gave myself a guideline here. I'm giving myself a guideline in here. So I'm going to draw sort of a line on top and a line on the bottom to represent the top and the bottom of the letters. I'm making sure it's bigger on this side and smaller on this side. I'm making sure it starts kind of near the end of one lemon and ends at the other end. And now, again, I'm not worried too much about my fonts right now. I just want to make sure all of my letters will fit in. I'm just going to do some letters, make sure that they all fit inside this space. And if they don't, I'm gonna like erase and adjust. So I've got my letters in, and I'm gonna see how these letters are. These letters are straight and perfectly horizontal, so I'm gonna make sure I represent that when I draw it. All right, so I've now blocked everything in, and I'm rechecking to make sure my sizes are accurate, making sure that I put the letters in the right spot, that I have one word, two words, and then two words at the bottom. I'm looking at where they're placed in comparison to the rest of the picture, and making sure I didn't forget any important elements in my drawing. Once I think I have everything drawn accurately, it's now time for me to refine this. That means actually take my time to draw a little bit more carefully. There's a thick white outline around almost everything on here, so I'm going to make sure to add that to my drawing and erase any guidelines or scribbles that I might have as well. I'm also going to focus a lot on the fonts, the shapes of the letters, looking at how the end of the P has a little bit of a spike on one side and a spike on the other. So when I do that, I'm going to try to imitate that and try to get it as exact as I possibly can. So I'm going to zoom through and work on refining my drawing. Now we're ready to add some color to our drawing. So I'm going to be using Prismacolor color pencils. I like them a lot because I think they blend really well, they layer really nicely, and definitely a lot better than some of the cheaper brands like Crayola or most any other kind. But Crayola and all those other brands will work fine. There's nothing wrong with it. If you can't use something a little bit higher quality, no big deal. So what we're going to do now is try to do some color matching. So I'm going to try to find colors that already exist that are very similar to the colors that are in the can, or I might have to make them by layering colors together. So for example, that green color, I suspect that this one is going to probably match it, but just to be safe, I'm going to recommend you take a scrap paper and sort of color on it so you can really test it and see how it's going to look compared to the original, and I think that's pretty good. It might need a little bit more of a different color layered on top, but I'm going to start with this color. And when you are coloring, especially when you're doing like a can, most of the time the colors on these cans are very vibrant, very saturated, and very solid. So if I colored it in like this, like a really pale color, that's not going to really represent the true color of the can. I really want to press down hard with my pencil so I get a very strong, solid, saturated color. If as you're coloring you decide that some of your edges are getting lost, getting a little fuzzy and not as crisp as they should be, you can sharpen your pencil and go along the edge and really line it up, make it really clean and neat and nice. Or you could even consider going through some things with a really thin Sharpie pen so that it's very neat and crisp. So I'm going to add the tiniest, lightest layer of this blue on top of my green because I think that this will make the lime green a little bit darker without totally changing the color. But it'll kind of darken the lime green a little bit because I think that this is a little bit more of a darker lime green color than just that one color by itself. So sometimes you might feel that you have to layer your colors. And again, you want to make sure that your colors are very saturated and clean by the time you're done. Make sure you have your pencil on hand so you can erase and crisp up things. Also, just know that you can't fully erase color pencil. You can lighten up. So if there are any stray edges or anything that looks kind of bad, you can kind of crisp it up using your eraser. I'm going to go through the rest of this, trying to match the color as best I can and just fill this all in. Then we'll talk about shading. have gotten my shading done for my can. I'm ready to do my actual shadow on the side of my can and my cast shadow on the ground. So before I talk about that, I just want to point out that I did do a lot of color layering to get the colors that I wanted. Sometimes I pressed really hard to make the color very vibrant. If it looked vibrant on the can, I tried to make it vibrant here as well. Sometimes I needed lots of layers to get there, and sometimes it took very few layers. To do the metal color of the can, any of the silver parts, I just used my pencil because it's already gray, and then I also used a little black to darken and really like perfect some of those parts. So now that I'm ready to do my cast shadow, to give this can a three-dimensional feel, we really want to make sure we have a shadow all along the side of the can. That's going to give this can a sense of roundness, as well as making sure we have a cast shadow on the ground, which again will give us a sense of this popping off of the page. So it doesn't matter too much which side you pick. If you can actually look at your real life can and see where the shadow is naturally being cast, that can help you when you're doing this on here. Now when I look at my can, I'm setting it down on my paper, and you can see even from your angle that the shadow is coming out on this side of the can, so the left side of the can, not so much the right. So if you can tell which side is coming out, then you know where to put the shadow. Additionally, whatever side the shadow is coming out of, that's the same side that you should have a shadow for the actual side of the can. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pick the left side. I'm going to take my black color pencil, and I'm going to start by pressing kind of hard on one side, and then I'm going to progress from a dark shadow and fade it out into a lighter shadow all the way across. I'm not going all the way past the can, just the first little maybe third of the can or so. And you'll notice that I'm going right on top of everything. So even my letters that I spent time drawing really nicely, I'm doing my shadow on top of that. It's important you cover everything equally with your shadow when you're doing a shadow on the side, because that's what feel real. In real life, shadows do not care if there are nice, cool lettering or cool patterns or colors. A shadow is going to cover whatever it wants to cover. So that's why it's important to make sure you're not avoiding things that you just don't feel like covering with your shadow, but you're actually covering up the entire space, no matter what's in its way. All right, and hopefully you can already tell that just this little bit of a shadow on the side of the can really makes this can feel like it's rounder, like it's popping out at you. And to further enhance that feeling, we're going to finally put a shadow on the ground. So we don't have much space over here, so we're going to have our shadow go right off the page. What I'm going to do is start with my shadow underneath the can a little bit and have it go straight out towards the side. And then I'm going to somewhere midway up. If you could actually look at your can while it's staying there, try to identify where the shadow looks like it's popping out of. Now, from your perspective, you're seeing the aerial perspective of the can, but when I observe it from my perspective, it looks like the shadow is right about here. Where it's ending is right about this last bar. So on here, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to draw sort of a line way up high, and that's going to represent the space that my shadow should be in for my cast shadow. Shadows are always darkest right next to the object, and if you actually look at your can sitting on the ground, you're going to find that there's this sort of darker band of shadow directly underneath it. So I'm going to make sure I press hardest there, and then the rest of the space is going to be a little bit lighter. As the shadow gets further away from its object, it gets lighter and lighter. All right, and there we have our first can drawing completed. So I did my absolute best to look at the actual can, draw it as accurately as I could, using as much color and vibrancy as I could, and making sure I added cast shadows in the appropriate place. Now we're ready to do the next step, which is starting to crush our can and draw it from a crushed perspective.